So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Daniela Medeo. I work in marketing and public programs for the Mead Art Museum. On behalf of the Mead, I'm so pleased to welcome you all here this evening. We really miss having you in our physical building. We desperately miss inviting artists to campus, but we're so grateful to Jes Fan for being here with us this evening and to all of the alumni, students, parents, friends who are making time to join us virtually. We're glad to be able to do it this way instead and hope to be able to welcome you all back into the building and to start inviting artists back to campus as soon as it's safe. So on that note, I want to underscore that we're coming to you wherever you are. Please make yourselves comfortable in your space. Feel free to have your camera on or off. If your cat walks across your computer or if your kid comes into the frame, that's all good. They're welcome to this program as well. We're happy to have you here from wherever you are. Our program this evening will consist of a presentation of selected artworks and their practice by contemporary artist Jes Fan. Immediately following Jes's talk, Professor of Art and the History of Art, Nico Vicario, will present some questions that are particularly relevant to the courses that he's teaching at Amherst. And after that, we'll open up for questions and comments from the audience. This event is being recorded, but we aren't filming any of the attendees. So we're going to ask that you send your questions directly to me. I have moderator in my chat name, so you can find me easily, or to Jan Martin, who's the director of the Queer Resource Center, who also has moderator in their chat name to make it simple. If you run into any tech questions throughout the presentation, feel free to direct message us at any time. We're here to help. Jes will be sharing his screen and sharing images and also video, which has audio, which we got to sample in our tech prep. It was really great. So be sure to listen out for some of the audio and the video recordings. When Jes is sharing his screen, there is going to be a toggle bar that you can use to expand so that you can see the images at the full scale of your screen. So be sure to play around with that so that you really can take a closer look at some of those images. And before we begin, I'd like to thank, big thank you to Ifer Telipi and Carol Allman Morton from Alumni and Parent Programs for all of their support in building the tech and making this program accessible to all of you who are joining us this evening. And I'd also like to thank the Eastman Fund and the Department of Art and the History of Art for supporting this talk, as well as the QRC for being a wonderful program partner. So I'm going to share some bios of our presenters and our partners this evening, and then we'll get started with the presentation. So first, I'd like to welcome and thank Jan Martin, the director of the Queer Resource Center at Amherst College. They're a thought partner in this program series, which will continue with a student-centered lunch program tomorrow. And at the end of the talk, I'll turn things over to Jan to share more about that program and more about the QRC to folks who might want to learn more. Nico Vicario is an assistant professor of art and the history of art at Amherst College, where he teaches a range of courses about art of the 20th and 21st centuries. His first book was published at the University of California Press earlier this year, and his research is primarily focused on the relationship between materiality of art and capitalism. And that's one of a number of reasons why he's become interested in Jes Fan's practice. It's going to be a really great conversation following the talk. Jes was born in Canada and raised in Hong Kong. Speculating on the intersection of biology and identity, his trans-disciplinary practice emerges from a sustained inquiry into the concept of otherness as it relates to the materiality of the gendered body. Working primarily in expanded sculpture, Jes often incorporates organic materials such as soybeans and testosterone into larger assemblages fashioned of welded steel, poured resin, and hand-blown glass. Previous projects have focused on the biopolitics of transgender identity and the slippery nature of embodiment in an era where hormone replacement therapy and other body modification tactics are easily accessible, allowing the subject to mold their external body to match their internal state. Jes's recent research has explored the complex and porous systems formed between biological agents and the surrounding environment, seeking to queer the traditional hierarchy between organic and inorganic matter. Jes is currently based in Brooklyn and we're thrilled to have them all here with us this evening. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jes. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me, Amherst College, and especially the QSA and Mead Museum. I'm going to share my screen right now. And let me see. There we go. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my work. So I am primarily a sculptor. My work is mostly driven by a really material-based concern and questioning of what is it made out of, how is it made, and how can I make that? But these really fundamentally almost seemingly geared towards like the engineering of a form of a material is also applied to more philosophical kind of endeavors. Like, how is my gender made? How is my race engineered? How can I make that? How can I pretend, but not pretend, but how can I remake that? Or how can I kind of extract from these questions? So this is an image of me holding a blob that contains testosterone and also fragments of melanin. It was from a residency that I did at Recess Art in 2018. And in my work, most recently, I've been incorporating a lot of biological materials that are considered abject or triggers like really gut response of like disgust, materials that we are just so synonymous with infections or danger that I encase them in these like kind of too beautiful to not look at vessels that are usually made out of glass. And I'm going to start with my most recent presentation at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney, in Australia, where I took over a gallery space and installed these two shelves that are inspired by scholar shelves. I look a lot at antiquity and also specifically Chinese antiquity, and really interested in the kind of vernacular that look like, what is that vernacular that like looks Chinese? And you also see in the gallery space, the main lighting is coming from the video that I'll talk more in depth in later slides, but it's in the back of the gallery, kind of changing the lighting of the sculptures as well. But in these shells, they're each called form begets function, and the other one's called function begets form. It borrows its title from a very common kind of phrase that people use in biology. And in each of these shells, they hold specific kind of globules that there are specific places to fit them and cradle them, almost like a pearl growing out of an oyster. This one contains my blood, the one in the upper shelving. And this one has melanin that I made with a biolab in Brooklyn in 2018 and also in 2019 as well. And this one has my urine, and the other one also has melanin. And this one has estrogen. And they're all kind of cradled in this specifically carved housing that's felted, that insinuates like this relationship that's very much different than how Western kind of traditions approaches the way of holding a sculpture. Like, no one cares for the bottom of a sculpture almost. But with my history in glassblowing, which I studied glass at RISD, with my kind of like brief history in the craft world, I'm really interested in kind of insinuating that the only and the most kind of closest way you can truly understand the weight and the meaning of this object and this substance that this object's encased in is by holding it and touching it against your skin. Like, what does it mean to like actually hold testosterone in my hand when it's in my body? What does it mean to hold estrogen in my hand when it's in my body, right? And I actually steal this kind of idea from, I love these objects. One of my favorite museums is like going to the Taiwanese uh, National Palace Museum. And this is actually from Hollywood Road. There's like so many stores in Hong Kong, Hollywood Road, that are just selling these traditional Chinese antiques. And I would always go around and stroll around there. And if you look closely, like it's really different than this relationship where you see like this weird, mysterious tree trunk grafting someone like just to balance like the object, and you'll never be able to remove it from its holder. Versus like this previous relationship, you can, it's so delicately carved to cradle the bottom of the sculpture, insinuating it can be removed and actually be held in your palms, right? Like that kind of elevation only like exists with like the utmost care. So this is my favorite object in the world. It's this jade cabbage in the Taiwan National Palace Museum. And it just so elegantly like house this object by carving the indentation of its base and presenting to you without actually grafting it, right? Like there's no right way to see it until you hold it. And that relates a lot to a core concern in my practice is skin, and also thinking about the body as a system, and like upon removing the skin, like just thinking of a body as almost like a root network, like a mycelial network. And a lot of the, I'm really influenced by writings by Haraway, also Anna Ching, and also Divalina Roy, like thinking about borrowing from root networks and interspecial kinship, like in grafting a new understanding of what it means to be human in such a political time. And during my residency at Recess, I created these glass bubbles, and I worked with a biolab. I actually commissioned a lab in Brooklyn called Brooklyn Bio to make melanin for me, which I'll explain in further slides. And I created this series called Systems that essentially it's just these kind of, they look like circuit boards in some way. Some people have described them looking like jungle gyms, but their sole purpose is to be a holder, essentially the same relationship as the jade cabbage. They're just this elaborate kind of bottom for these glass forms. And I showed this at Hayward Gallery in London. So this is how we began working with melanin, and it originated from, in my work, I do extensive research before I actually start producing anything. And my research extends beyond just theoretical literature, but also like goes into the fields of science. And specifically, I ran into this paper that talks about how these strains of fungi in Chernobyl actually uses melanin the way that green plants as we know it uses chlorophyll to transfer sunlight into energy source. These fungi were proven to actually use melanin to absorb radiation from these water tanks in Chernobyl to actually provide energy source from themselves. And I was really interested in this idea how science fiction is actually not fictive for a lot of species. So I just approached, I was like, yeah, how do we make melanin? Like, how is melanin made outside of the body, right? How do we shift from like a really anthropocentric anthropocentric place of thinking about this substance that's highly politicized, but locating it into another species that, you know, like eumelanin specifically is a biopigment that exists in many, many species. And so I worked with Brooklyn Bio, and I specifically asked them to use E. coli as the carrier, as the host for this melanin growth. Um, and essentially we changed the genome sequence of the melanin for it to express, to melanize, and we just essentially put it under a UV light after changing its genome sequence, and harvested these on plates and froze it in nitrogen, and then scraped it off the plate. And this is how on the right side you see the pigment darkening over time. And we essentially created these little flecks that are like almost like pigment suspended in the solution. And the solution also darkens over time. And in this endeavor, I was thinking like, how do I, beyond the sculpture, how do I allow access to these ideas that I have that are beyond what the sculpture can actually articulate? Like, then I thought about the format of the video and its potential with how I've noticed that younger audience have a higher appetite for video, and they actually can focus more while looking at moving image. So I decided to go through the route of using a video to kind of make transparent this research, this arc of research that I have in my practice. So this video is called Xenophoria, which is opposed to xenophobia. It means like the love for the other, the love for the foreign. And it's kind of a play on a name of a kind of a seashell, which I'll show in later slides, and also makes its appearance in this video, where it's called the artist shell. And the seashell grafts itself to various objects and calcifies itself to these objects on the seafloor, and kind of not camouflages, but also decorates itself. And I just thought how poetic of a metaphor it is, like thinking about like accumulation of knowledge as a lived experience that is in a spiral and not necessarily linear. So I was borrowing from this shell. So here's the shell. It just calcifies and grafts itself to anything it finds on the seafloor. And I bought this on eBay. And now, like the really expensive ones are ones that actually graft to Coca-Cola cans, because we're in such a polluted space right now that these shells would just graft itself to like trash on the seafloor. And simultaneously, this video also shows me locating, really absurdly, like locating traces of melanin, like the melanized tumors of Lamclaw's painting, and thinking in relation of how like kind of following the illogic of the shell, just like this kind of spiral grafting of everything I can find, and creates this like whole montage that shows in the back of the gallery, as the first few slides documented. I also was really obsessed with sea life. Sea form is a huge source of inspiration for me. And in here, I was actually looking for the ink sac in squids, and squids also have a high eumelanin content in their ink sacs. I'm also really influenced by Audre Lorde's writing on the power of erotics, and thinking about how to convey or actually seduce the audience, and is something that I think about a lot, like in making these videos, and also, but seduction not just by beauty, but actually with the grotesque. Grotesque, actually, it's really interesting. It comes from the Italian word grotto, which means caves, and it actually, like in the past, it also was used to describe something that's so beautiful that actually makes you want to puke. So I'm going to stop here and move on to other slides. So this is the shell, Xenophora. And these are the slides that I was heavily researching Lamclaw's portraits of, that was commissioned by a medical missionary called Peter Parker. And at the time in Canton, Peter Parker was a known surgeon that would remove tumors from the local population and claim it as acts of God, and also didn't use anesthesia, though it was available at the time. As we all know, that it was commonly believed that bodies of color actually can experience pain the same way that white bodies do. I was really interested in these because I was also thinking along the lines of the power of the erotics and how erotically charged these images are. Like once you've laid eyes on it, you can't forget it, you can't unsee them. And I was thinking of how, like, I think of everything as technology, and I was thinking of these paintings as a form of technology that's used to engineer the idea of the Chinese person as, like, you know, the sick man of Asia, but also the white body is impure and infectious. Like, these are some themes that really hovered around my residency at Recess. Because I was so adamant in using E. coli as the host for melanin, I was simultaneously aware of how during times of plague, like non-white bodies are always seen as infectious versus the white pure body that can only be infected upon, but cannot be an arc of contagion. That's a sentimentality that's really that displayed itself during our own pandemic, the pandemic of our times, where we see people that refuse to wear face masks because of the logic that the heroic white male cannot be a contaminant. So on other videos, I also I play a lot in my own work, and I really don't know how this video came into fruition, but I'm kind of obsessed with it. And one really good advice that I got as a young artist was to just be obsessed with my obsessions. And one of my obsessions is ASMR. I titled this video Hand Feeling, and it was really inspired by a Cantonese word which that says "saogam," which means, literally translates to hand feeling, but is used colloquially to describe that by touching something, you can understand the weight and the value and the meaning of that something that you're holding and touching and caressing. And I guess the direct translation in English would be haptic affect, but it's used more colloquially, so it's less academic and it's more accessible. And this video was also showed in small monitors in the Sydney Biennial as well. So another video that I did, it would actually, everyone can hear the audio of this video, right? Okay, cool. So this was part of my solo show at Empty Gallery in Hong Kong. And the show kind of revolves around this narrative arc of what this work presents. It's called Mother is a Woman. I'll let the video speak for itself.
Mother is a Woman is beyond a beauty cream. Freshly harvested from a single source origin, each ester invites you to be feminized by my mother. Using artisanal technology, we work closely with laboratories in the US to extract the purest estrogen from my mother's urine. Beyond a beauty cream, Mother is a Woman invites you to rethink kinship through the pores of your skin. Can our epidermis be our first contact of kinship? As your skin absorbs my mother's estrogen, you are feminized by her. Mother is a woman, asks, who are you to her? And who are you to me? To apply, gently rub the cream onto your skin. In circular motions, in small dosages, or in liberal quantities. Mother is a woman can be applied however you want, daily or weekly, or whenever you miss home. Kin is where the mother is.
So I'm going to stop here and move on with the slides. So this is kind of the culture that was enveloping me as I was growing up in Hong Kong. That's where I spent my formative years, and I immigrated to the US 10 years ago. I was thinking about the kind of pseudoscience in commercial beauty culture and how funny it is. And this idea of biological luxury, it was something that I really want to recreate in my solo show in Hong Kong at MT Gallery at the time. And it's a really, really cool space where it's it's in this industrial building, but as you enter, as you enter in the gallery, you like totally, your world changes. I don't know if anyone grew up watching Doraemon, but it was like, you know how Doraemon is a fantastic art piece of art that everyone has to watch. But essentially, he pulls out this door from his like pouch, and then you can enter into another space, like it's a portal. And this is how the gallery is like. It's within this industrial building, and you just suddenly enter this portal of complete black space. There's no natural light in the space at all, but the gallery was just really supportive of the work and just was like, yeah, we'll line the floor with fur and we'll paint all the walls beige. And at the time, I really want to imitate this like feeling of luxury, but at the same time making it feel completely animalistic, and just like putting the experience on the edge of you're not exactly sure how to locate this space. Like you're almost like in a luxury commercial space, but at the same time it's like slightly off, that there's something uncanny in there. In the gallery, I showed a few series of work that was called Diagrams, that looks into these, that references illustration of the epidermis and the kind of breakdown of layers in those medical drawings that I look into a lot. And kind of this technique that I've been doing of just putting a lot of pigments in my castings, in my body castings, and then eventually sand them down to reveal the layers that created the form. And this piece was called is called Forniphilia, where I actually casted the chest of my friend Sue from Law, who is a bodybuilder, a non-binary bodybuilder in Hong Kong. But they completely transitioned through like the technology of bodybuilding. And I casted, they actually was in Chicago at the time doing a bodybuilding contest. So I asked them to come to my studio in Red Hook, and I casted their chest and created a series of work from it. And from the Forniphilia work, I started using my own body casts and splicing them and turning them into really abstract forms that almost look like furniture, but they're not functionable. Like, I think a lot about the hierarchies of craft and art, and why is it that when something has a function, it's considered too pedestrian to be considered as art. And a whole series of work kind of emerged from this. They're all kind of either my own body or bodies of my queer network, just abstracted and fragmented into these pseudo furniture, but also not. Like, I've been told that they look like implants a lot, but they're glass pieces. I think I'm mostly attracted to glass because there's no other materials that kind of encapsulate this feeling of fluidity, this like look of being in flux so accurately. In another gallery space at MT, their house, this sculpture called Visible Woman, which I actually borrowed its name from this toy I found after Boxing Day in Red Hook, and someone must have really hated their gift and like left it by their stoop. And I picked it up and I was just thinking like how funny it is this, that it's actually like a teaching kit for biology classes that to show you what is visibly a woman. Then I started questioning what is visibly a woman, right? Like part of this kit, like the variable of the visible woman is actually enlarged stomach in a fetus. So I was like, I was really intrigued by this proposition of like pregnancy being a key factor of being visibly woman. And so I presented like the most visible woman by retaining like the most important biological parts of her functioning as a woman and like placed it into a screen. There's her lungs, but also there's like the fetus, of course, in the upper left. But we scanned the toy parts of the kit and then 3D printed it and then sanded it down. In another gallery space, MC was really cool. I was like, I think I'm just gonna pour silicone on the walls, and they're like, yeah, sure. And I owe a lot of like this gesture from Linda Benglis and Eva Hess, but I was thinking of how to turn the space into something that's animate and also uncanny at the same time. And in this gallery, it actually houses another sculpture that kind of no longer survives because it's actually really difficult to maintain it or even photograph it. It's a screen that's created by just gluing these capsules of soybeans by brushing water in between their seams. This is a better shot of it in a photo studio, but I was really interested in soybeans because I was doing a lot of research of how is testosterone and estrogen made pharmaceutically. This is another small sculpture that was made with the same technique. And actually the phytosterols in soybeans extremely similar to human steroid production. And it's both estrogen and testosterone pharmaceutically is produced through soybeans and other species of yams. But I focused on the idea of how this like really humble kind of singular being is responsible for what we consider as really opposite kind of gender formations, like, or actually what we consider is really, binary opposites of each other. So I did a fellowship at Socrates Sculpture Park, and it was a really amazing experience. I learned so much doing this, including the fact of never personally make public art anymore. It's a really arduous task. But jokes aside, like I was following the trajectory of like soybeans and the kind of it's how funny it is that it is the source for both of these binary opposites. And I created this kind of miniature greenhouse where these soybeans can grow underneath the sculpture. And I'm gonna go to some older works, and this is when I first started introducing biological products, into my work. And this is a series that I made during a residency at the Museum of Arts and Design. And I was fully cognizant that the museum has a history in crafts. It used to be the American Craft Museum. And I thought, like, how funny is it that if I make the craftiest objects available during my residency? Like, so I make soap and candles. And this is called Testo Candle. But it started when I started taking testosterone myself, and I was looking into the label of the vials, and I realized that testosterone, depo-testosterone, is suspended in cottonseed oil, which is a lipid that you can either saponify or infuse in other kind of fatty acids. So that's essentially what I did for both of these pieces. But thinking about, again, like the hierarchies of craft, art, and design, like why is something considered craft when it's overtly feminine or overtly requires like so much manual labor in the making of it. And it's quite funny because testosterone, unlike estrogen, is an FDA-regulated drug, like a type 3 FDA-regulated drug. So when we displayed it, we actually had to make sure that it's sealed in a box. And here is some older works from, I think, 2017. This was at Parasite in Hong Kong, where I showed some works that I was working out a lot at the time. And I was really intrigued, like thinking about the gym as like a sculpting studio, like body sculptors, but like they're literally sculpting their own body versus I'm using the body as a subject matter and making sculptures about it. And then I was like thinking, how do I animate these objects? And I made these barbells out of soap, and also created this series of work called Disposed to Add, where these barbells are made out of prosthetic silicone. And the word disposed to add is actually from the etymology of the word prosthetics. And I was thinking at the time, as I was making these works, that because my subject matter has so much to do with the body, one second. The body, then I was thinking, why don't I invite people to actually use these sculptures? And I essentially gave these two really amazing performers the prompt of how to negotiate intimacy by the physical constraints of the sculpture. And they improvise these actions of like tying and like snapping and slapping each other and whipping each other. And it was really phenomenal, the performance. So to end, I want to end with these slides that is really important to my artistic practice and how I think and navigate the world. This is Fiona from the Cincinnati Zoo. And Fiona was birthed when she was really young, and she was prematurely born. And so they had to separate her from her mother. And when they reunited her, Fiona's instinct was to like crawl back to her mother's throat. It like terrified everyone because hippos are actually really violent. They thought the mom's gonna eat her, but she actually like went in and then never came back out. No, I'm kidding. And then she like crawled back out. But it was like really a poetic image that's just lodged in our mind, and I thought I should share. So this is my work. I'm gonna stop sharing screen.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thanks so much for your talk. That was wonderful. I'm sure everyone is clapping, but they're muted. I really appreciate you joining us, Jes, and talking about these projects. Some of the audience here, as you know, are students in my Introduction to Contemporary Art class, so shout out to them, if people still say that. And then also, right, an illustrious group of other guests here. I'm curious about many things in your work, but I'll keep it somewhat brief to leave time for other people to talk. But you talk about your practice, and it's clear that it's transdisciplinary. So I'm curious. This is maybe a really broad and could be an annoying question. You can let me know. But what is the role of art and artists within a transdisciplinary research field, or within a...
By role, do you mean responsibility, or?
However you might answer that question.
Can you ask that question again?
Yeah, so you're interested in this transdisciplinary range of practices, or many different fields enter into your transdisciplinary practice. So I'm curious about how art fits in, how art is a part of that transdisciplinary field.
I think that contemporary art nowadays is just, it encompasses so many different mediums and disciplines that it is impossible for someone that's, you know, who's making art that's relevant to the times that we're in to be located in one singular discipline. I think, at least for me, that's kind of impossible. And I actually think, as an artist myself, I am exactly in the intersection of many talents. Like I wouldn't be able to make the work that I'm making if the work that I do doesn't trigger curiosity from other fields. And if I were to not be open to those, you know, collaborations, actually, I don't see the point of what's generative in that. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can relate to that. And I'm curious, kind of thinking about the range of practices, even those that are more conventional within fields of art or craft. So thinking about glass blowing or working with clay, but also collaborating with biology labs. Like, could you say more about your interest in materials and process? And then I'm like curious about how they come together even within a single project.
I think it's because I ask really absurd questions that I don't stop asking them until I have like some form of satisfaction in that questioning. It's not even necessarily I want an answer, but most of the time it's me continually pushing these questions, like, so how is it made? Like, how can I make it? And ultimately that led me into speaking with people who are engineers, people who are biochemists, and that's how, it's just how my curiosity led me to just, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So this might be a little bit like of a niche question for people who are not in my class, who may or may not have read this Mushroom at the End of the World chapter by Anna Ching, but you mentioned her work, and also Donna Haraway earlier, as well as some other scholars. So, and you have worked with fungi yourself, right, as a material in your work. So again, like, I realize it's kind of an awkward question because some people here won't have read the book or won't be familiar, but I would recommend it to everyone who is here if you're interested in some of the ideas that come up in Jes Fan's practice. But would you feel comfortable talking a little bit about that book and what it means for you, and also why you wanted to share it with the students in conjunction with this talk?
I thought it was a really apt book to read in light of the pandemic. I think one of the most poetic propositions that Anna has to offer is thinking of infection as and as not as lethal or dangerous, but thinking of infection as possibility of creating new forms of diversity, and how those diversity, like tied, like fungi at the end of, like mushrooms at the end of the world, essentially is the title of the book. Like thinking about how post ruins, these matsuge mushroom is able to thrive because of the ruins, right? That's something I wanted to offer as like some form of solace for students who are like so bravely doing school behind their screens right now. Like I wouldn't be able to do that. So that's why I thought we could, you know, it would be a prompt reading to share. for your students. Yeah.
Right, and I think the subtitle of the book, right, involves capitalist ruins.
Right, exactly.
Which is, not right. We've been working on those ruins for a while. It's not specific to 2020, but there's maybe a particular resonance. So I was curious, maybe another broad question, but do you feel like 2020 has affected your practice and your work and the way you think about your work?
Yeah,
About capitalist
immensely.
ruins, thinking about infection, thinking about identity as it manifests, right, in these particular materials and materialities that you explore in your work.
Yeah, immensely. I've been thinking a lot about just reflecting on the fact that I've touched base on that a little bit in my presentation, but thinking a lot about how it took the West so long, or CDC, it took CDC so long to actually recommend face mask wearing, and how it's actually, it traces back into this really old idea that took so many forms of technology, such as those paintings, such as other different kind of medical histories, to actually carve out this image of the white heroic male that cannot be contaminated upon, or cannot be a contaminant, that some people, politicize this whole idea, as well, as we know. But I'm just remarked by the fact that it took the West so long to catch up with the idea of wearing masks, and that we are all contaminants. And I was just thinking a lot about that fact, but also on a more personal note, I think during the pandemic, I was reflecting a lot on why we make art, and how, kind of re-gauging, what is the purpose of making art at this time. Those are questions I can't answer still, but I'm working my way through it, just keep, yeah, it's just, yeah, I don't have questions for that yet, but I definitely have a lot of kind of reflection on that. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I think we could open the floor, or the window, or the screen to questions,
the portal,
and comments from other people, as transmitted via the portal that is the chat box. If I could turn it over to Danielle or Jen.
Sure. Thank you both so much for getting us started on so much rich thinking. We have 47 attendees, so I invite you all to drop questions, comments in the chat. You can make them visible to everyone, or you can direct message questions to either myself or Jan Martin. We have moderator in the title. And as those trickle in, I don't know if you have any questions that you want to share. If not, I definitely have some, but we can open it up to the chat as well. Oh, here's something coming in. Someone asks, Jess, you explore the grotesque a lot. Do you find that people sometimes tell you that their work makes you uncomfortable? For example, for Mother is a Woman, people were uncomfortable at the opening when we applied urine cream to people's hands.
I feel like this is from someone who was actually in the opening, because yeah, we did apply it to people. Did Caitlin ask this question? Yeah, so Caitlin's actually the voiceover of the narrator. Sorry for outing you, but I thought, I mean, what's the point if people don't have a reaction to it? But not that the work has to be reactionary, but I mean, I feel like in the, in these moments of hesitation, or when people say no to things, I think it creates space for them to be like, why am I saying no to this, right? Why why am I refusing this? What does this trigger? Or at least that would be my response. And I'm always a person that says yes to everything. So yeah, it's just something that it's so funny that Keelan asked this question, because I think she actually had to offer the cream to other people. So yeah.
Thank you. So I have a question as we wait for more questions and comments to come through the chat. Jess, how does your work age? And do you think,
Oh yeah.
I was thinking a lot about Felix Gonzalez Torres' work and the candy piles, and how emotion is a part of the work for some artists that are thinking through similar practices.
Yeah,
How you think about your work aging?
that's a great question. And I'm also really influenced by Mel Chen's writing, like thinking about the animacy of materials, like animacy being a linguistic term of being able to measure how animate the noun is, or the verb. And so I was thinking, I was actually really interested in these like soybeans possibly growing out of these pill capsules, or the pill capsules melting, because of the humidity in the air. Or I was in a show I did in Vox Populi, I actually was vaporizing depo-testosterone in humidifiers. And I was really, it's like in the blood pieces as well, sometimes because they're, essentially it's like they're alive, and they decay over time, and they gas, and sometimes they break. And in those gestures, I think it's actually quite poetic in the way that they react over age, and they have their own kind of rupture, or they have their own kind of leakages. And I think those are actually, it adds to the meaning of the work at times. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Jess. I have a follow-up question that's related from someone in the audience who is curious about the way form and color changes over time. And their question is, what does this impose on your work?
Form and color, you mean like form and color as in the actual like decoloring of the sculptures over time? I think, I wish I was able to see any of the Ava Hess's work in color photographs or in person at the time that they're made. But seeing them now, despite only seeing them now in their own, like age kind of fragility actually adds to the kind of poetry of her work. I think for my own personal experience, I kind of didn't want to see them brand new, right? During the time when fiberglass was just invented. I really, really enjoy seeing those pieces aging like that. So I guess that's a way of answering the question, is that it's totally out of my control how the material ages, but I think it adds to the piece. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question that says, how do the bodily materials you have a personal connection to, for example, mother's urine, differ from lab-produced bodily materials, specifically the melanin?
Yeah, I think in the Mother's a Woman project, I was darkly trying to explore this idea of queering kinship, queering our understanding of what makes blood kin, right? Can the permeability of the cream deliver another form of intimacy? Those were mainly the questions I was asking. But for the E. coli project, I wasn't weighing into the idea of intimacy so much. I was really interested in the proposition of E. coli as being a host for my reproduction, or for kind of my prompt of reproducing this highly racialized and politicized material. And thinking about how race, especially like miscegenation, is seen as a source of infection, or like if you think about Jim Crow laws, like bodies of water has to be segregated. And then if you think about Hong Kong during bubonic plague, how the peak was segregated from the rest of the Chinese population, and only the peak was allowed for white people. like thinking about the parallels of our fears of infection, of like this microbial infection, and it runs almost similar in parallel to racial kind of miscegenation, like, and mixing, like those were what I was interested in. So they're really, really different projects. Yeah.
Another question reads, I'm curious, were visitors welcome to touch or cradle the ampules, or was that experience just suggested by the shape of an ampule nestled into it? Sorry if you said that and it was missed.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Ideally, in my most ideal exhibition, that the audience will be able to cradle it, but because it was in the museum, like it was highly, like insurance became an issue and logistics became an issue. But you know, in my most ideal form, it would be a safe environment for everyone to like hold and cradle the piece and understand it that way. Yeah.
Awesome. So I think some of the Mead curators are on the call. Maybe that's an invitation to think about. We have a question from an artist and an art student asking, have you tried to make paints out of melanin pigment?
No, my good friend Doreen is a tattoo artist, and I thought about maybe like turning it into a tattoo ink. But then it causes a strain of issues of like possibly triggering melanoma, and you know, things that no one really should subject their bodies to because of art. So that project got abandoned. I kept like pushing towards my friends who have medical backgrounds, be like, hey, can I do this? Can I do this? And like keep wanting them to say yes, but no one approved of this idea. So I had to abandon it. But tattooing is the farthest that I thought about. But I'm also a terrible painter, so I don't think I would be. It would be a good contestant in having that to be turned into ink. Yeah, melanin's actually also, you can also buy online. Like there's no intrigue. There's only internet, so you can actually purchase it online. But it's extremely expensive. Melanin is, I think, priced at $380 something per milligram, per gram, and it's more expensive than gold. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. I'm going to turn over to Jan Martin, who has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. And Jess, thank you for a wonderful presentation and conversation thus far. So just a little bit, I also get excited about Mel Chen's work. So when you started talking about Mel Chen as like as an inspiration and hearing you present about your work, I got really excited. And I'm thinking you're sitting with this kind of the dichotomies or false dichotomies that that Chen complicates between the inanimate and the animate, or the organic and the inorganic. And I'm wondering how you think or read your work in complicating or animating those things in terms or in relation to identity, and how people read or don't read identity in your work. And I think you spoke a little bit to this in your presentation about like thinking about the incorporation of testosterone and estrogen and the kind of shared origin in the soybean. Anyway, so I'm just curious if you have some thoughts around that.
Yeah, totally. I love this question. You know, in the works where especially with the globs, the glass globs, where they hold these materials that are so symbolic and is synonymous in our culture with specific identity categories, such as like testosterone, masculinity, estrogen, femininity, like by presenting as in their raw material form. You know, I'm almost like, is this what you're looking for? Like, is this where the identity is located? Like, it feels, it seemingly, and on the surface, it feels essentialist, but then in reality, it's actually like quite a humorous ask of, you know, when I offer you these flecks of pigment, is that ultimately the smallest unit of race you're looking for? And the answer is often no, right? Like, because as we, you know, like it's just all these identity categories are social facts, but biological fiction. Yeah.
Thank you. We do have we have a queue of questions, so thank you all for sending these in. Thank you, Jess, for your talk. I appreciated your very personal journey being investigated through so many materials and visual expressions. I also love how you relate the natural animal world, such as the shells and hippopotami, to physical and emotional instincts. Do you instinctively select your materials from your questioning of notions of gender conformation, i.e., challenging the expective function of a material such as latex and splashing it on the wall, etc.? What has surprised you?
That's a really long question, but I'm gonna, I think I can answer it. I The word obsession is actually a military term in the past where it's used possession versus obsession. Like possession actually means like the um, taking hold of everything around the citadel, and obsession actually means like, taking over the entire city, including the citadel. And I think that in my long about way of answering this is that like these obsessions of mine it's almost similar to like me um, taking hold of my own core, like trying to understand what it is that it's in my core that drives me into being obsessed over some things like ASMR or like just these instinctive kind of draws to like um, silicone or yeah, like how I started studying glass. Like it was just this gut feeling. But as I keep doing it, it offers like I find answers as I keep doing it or more questions. Like I didn't come to the States thinking I would study glass, really. So yeah.
Thank you. We have a question from an alum and an artist and all-around brilliant human, asking if you could speak, Jess, on how you went through getting into conversation and relationship with biologists and the labs. How do you find these people and form relationships with them?
Yeah, I think, as I said before, as an artist, I'm just in the very lucky position of being able to trigger people's excitement and curiosity. But of course, that comes with like the need of like actually writing a proposal and like proposing people through a more business formal way. And with budgeting and grants, like you can facilitate the project that way. But the conversation with Brooklyn Bio really started with the support of the Recess Art residency, where it's an amazing residency program where you're allowed to like do whatever you want as long as you write it down and explain it. So yeah, that's how it started.
Thank you. So I'm really excited. We are so as Jess mentioned, Caitlin, who did the voiceover, is here, and Caitlin would like to ask a question.
Yeah.
Permission to record. So I'm gonna unmute Caitlin now, and you should be able to speak now.
I just miss you so much, Jay. I have to like tune in and insert myself into your
Hi,
space.
Kaylin. I didn't know you're an extrovert. Thank you for zooming in from Hong Kong.
For you, I would do I was thinking about like how you use scholar shelves as inspiration for form begets function, and also like how when you go to Taiwan, you have this like pilgrimage to the Gugong to like see the jade cabbage and the meat stone, and like you write these long Instagram stories that are like these affective readings of all these kind of like pre-modern Chinese objects. And as someone who's like from the Chinese diaspora, I always find it really exciting to see that someone is like queering these forms or queering these objects, like you said with the cradles. So I guess I just want to hear you talk more about like your pilgrimage to the National Museum Taiwan, and also like how these kind of like ancient Chinese objects like animate your interest in like materiality and touch, because they are like, some of them are really queer and weird. Like you posted that thing that's like a fish buried in an oyster shell, and you're like, this is how I want to die.
Well, I've been off social media for a long time. Thanks for asking that question, Caitlin. not all of those, especially the fish, specifically Kaylin's talking about this picture. I actually took that in the Natural History Museum in the Upper West Side in New York. It was actually, or was it another maybe it was the British Natural History Museum. But okay, full on disclosure, I'm a total museum nerd, and it was a picture of a fish being trapped inside a mother of pearl, like a shell, essentially, and the pearl growing into the shape of the fish. So it was this fish that was completely like a pearl. And I think actually it's very in line with like Anna Ching's idea of infection being another form. If we think about infection another way, because it's actually generative. Like if you think about a pearl, it's actually an infection to the shell. But it's because as we used to adorn our bodies as humans, it becomes something of capital, right? Like that kind of thinking is really interesting. So going back to the question a little bit, Caitlin, about my obsession with Chinese antiques, or referencing a lot of traditional Chinese motif, I think it comes from many places I can't exactly articulate, but I think it is mainly because I'm from Hong Kong, a city that was British and then now Chinese, and within that space of time, we were trying to articulate a very specific Hong Kong local identity, and there's never really been a form. Like there's no actually other identity, cultural identity as fluid, as in flux than one of Hong Kong's. Like it's located on the border of China, but it, no one around the kind of radius writes the same script as we do, because they all use mainland China use simplified Chinese, and in Hong Kong we use traditional Chinese. But it's like I think it is in a way that in looking back in history, I want to understand like where we are, and I think that's why I'm so drawn to historical museums, and oftentimes is the only singular adult in natural history museums. So I hope that answers the question. There's a lot of outing in this presentation.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from the audience? Or from
including from students in my class? You've got this. Pressure's on.
I think this might be one of your students, Professor Vicario. Do you see the globules and what they contain as an extension or reflection of different bodies?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Do you see the globules and what they contain as an extension / reflection of different bodies?
Yes and no, because like they're also bodies of their own. Like they are, the whole point of just presenting the material is also presenting the agency that these materials themselves like have agency. Like that they're like, as I was saying, that science fiction is not fictive to a lot of species. In a way, it's like flipping the really like I don't think of the body as just an anthropocentric kind of body. So in that question, like I think we have to break it down a little bit more before I can accurately answer what you're asking. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question, Danielle, if I'm not interrupting anybody. Jess, you were just speaking at various points over the course of the talk about kind of relationships to other species, and also I think at one point about the human and what is the human, or how to define the human. So I don't know if you could share the thoughts you're having at this point in life and in practice about what the human is, how we might think about
Right.
the human?
Or like, I think a lot about my body as akin to like a sausage casing, and I'm just like holding in this flesh. And but also, if anything, the virus we're experiencing now is really teaching us a really important lesson, that we as liberal humanist subject does not just exist by the packaging of our skin, right? Like our microsphere extends beyond just like the real estate of our physical body. We are able to affect and be affected by other people at a distance that we don't consider as what is the body, right? Like without touch, we are capable, or with touch, we're capable of changing the discourse of like the entire life for someone, you know? That's something that I think I've like, it's something, a really precious lesson I've learned from this pandemic. I feel very fortunate to be like able to say that, and observe that.
And are there elements of the human to hold on to, or should we kind of dissolve more and more into interspecies hybridity?
I think we are very, very interspecial. It's hard for me to construct like a human body that's completely removed from its entanglements. And entanglement is something that I didn't bring up in my lecture, but it's a motif. It's a word I think a lot about. And in even the architecture of the sculptures, it's something I express through the forms quite a lot. And I think we're all inherently entangled with each other, and it is only in the mess that we can thrive.
Thanks.
The notion of being able to thrive in the mess, and I think probably everyone can relate to that in some way. I have a follow-up, Jess, and I still invite more questions if folks have them. I'm wondering if on the planning portion of this, we talked about how the images of the work and the videos of your work are often the ways in which you're relating to them. And you talked about using video as a way to reach audiences that find video a comfort zone. I'm wondering if our transition into virtual programming and remote art consumption has changed the way you're thinking about making future work. And if there's been anything liberating or exciting about people's inability to be physically present with work, or in what ways that has been limiting as you think about making.
I haven't really made work for like specifically to cater to this like remote digital art viewing experience, and I don't have the intention to. But I think that even for myself, I crave for that physical art viewing experience. Like when the Met reopened, I was like the first in line. This is how I would but I can't tell exactly, because I feel like people who are younger, and I'm bookending like the last generation that has experienced life before screen. Like I remember my childhood without the interaction of a computer, right? But now these days, like I am constantly staring at a screen, if not more, like 5 to 6 hours a day. And in my own art making and art viewing experience, I kind of want to run away from that. So, yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to do a last call for questions. And as those come in, I'm going to turn it over to Jan, the director of the QRC, to share a little bit more about tomorrow's program and a little bit more about the QRC.
Sure, thanks, Danielle. So for folks who don't know what the QRC is, so the Queer Research Center is here at Amherst to support and further conversation that centers LGBTQ folks here. It is a student-facing center, but we are open to the entire community. And we do this through a whole bunch of different things: programming, leadership development, various trips and conferences that we take students to. So that said, tomorrow we're going to have one of our artist talks with Jes. Technically, during non-COVID times, this would be in the physical space of the center or physical home in Kyiv, but that is not possible. So it'll be virtual. I'll in a moment drop in the chat the registration link, the Zoom registration link for tomorrow's event. Folks are welcome. It is a space that will center students. So if you're a student, please come. And that said, bring your questions and other conversation we'll have continuing from here, and wherever the conversation comes from or takes us, we'll take it there. But yeah, so please, tomorrow that's 12 to 1 on Zoom. And again, I'll drop the link in just a moment in the chat. Thanks, Danielle.
Thanks, Jan. In our final moments, I'll do a last call for questions in case there are any students that have been pondering. And I'll also see, Nico, do you have any final thoughts or questions as well before we think about wrapping?
I don't, but I'm so grateful to Jes for spending time with us and sharing his work, and I'm really happy to have had the conversation.
Thank you so much. The feeling's mutual.
Thank you, Jes. Thank you, Nico. Thank you, the Art History Department, my colleagues at the Mead, colleagues at the QRC, especially Jan Martin. Thanks to all of our students, family, friends, alumni, colleagues who are tuning in from near and far. It's been really wonderful to spend this time with you. And I speak on behalf of all of my colleagues at the Mead. We really hope to be able to do these kinds of programs again with you in person, and hopefully be able to see work together in person again soon. But until then, we'll keep doing virtual programs like this. So thank you all for being here and for dropping the registration link in the chat. If you're interested in the program tomorrow and you're a student, feel free to click and register there. And thank you again, Jes, for your brilliant work and words and wisdom this evening.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.